Hi, I'm Dr Mike Nevell and welcome to my talk on archaeological work at Worsley Delph and Worsley Green. This is part of the online Greater Manchester Archaeology Festival that we're running in 2020 as a response to the pandemic, and it's possible to look at this talk again and download all sorts of materials that we have on the festival blog site, so please do come back and look at more of this material. My talk focuses on the archaeological work that we undertook from the University of Salford between 2013 and 2019. And there were two sides to that. There was the work that looked at the archaeology of Worsley Delph itself during the conservation and restoration work that has been going on for the past few years. And then there was a research and community archaeology excavation on Worsley Green, which we undertook in 2018 and 2019. I'm going to look at both of those and try to put those a little bit in the context of the archaeology of the Bridgewater Canal. Bridgewater Canal is the first long distance canal in industrial Britain. It was begun in 1759 and the canal was completed in 1773. It was financed by the Duke of Bridgewater, and his estate manager, John Gilbert, was responsible for the day-to-day construction of the canal, with the help of the water engineer and water expert James Brindley. But most of the canal was actually dug and built by estate workers from the Duke of Bridgewater's lands in Worsley. The whole point of the canal was that it was for draining water and providing a transport link to Salford and Manchester for the coal that was being dug out of the mines at Worsley. The canal would entered the mines at Worsley Delph, and ultimately there would be 80 kilometres, 52 miles or thereabouts of underground canals accessing the coal face on three separate levels. We know that by the 1790s, more than 100,000 tonnes of coal were extracted each year from these mines and sent down the canal to the markets in Salford and Manchester. And by 1840, that had risen to 200,000 tonnes. And we also know that the canal boat movements, the canal barges that were full of coal, also were quite substantial. So by the 1790s, there were at least 11 boats in and 11 boats out per year, and that had more than doubled by 1840. So the canal was not just a drainage ditch, it was also a major means of transporting coal from Worsley Delph through to Manchester and Salford. The mine entrance itself at Worsley Delph went through quite an evolution. Initially, when it was begun in 1759, there was a single entrance into the mine, which you can see in the top right-hand corner of this slide. But by the end of the 18th century, there were two entrances, two canal tunnels into the rock face at Worsley Delph, and actually they acted as a one-way system. So barges would go in on the eastern right-hand tunnel and come out on the western left-hand tunnel, the two meeting several hundred metres into the mine itself. This system was fine up until the mid-19th century, when the need for a more efficient way of extracting the coal from the Worsley mines meant that the main entrance was moved northwards to Walkden, and that led to the abandonment of Worsley Delph as the main entrance into the mines, certainly by the 1880s. And that meant also that throughout the 20th century, Worsley Delph became overgrown and silted up. There were some restoration works in the 1970s to clear out the Delph and to provide an access route and bridge onto the island between the two canal tunnels, but by the early part of this century, that too had become overgrown and inaccessible. In 2013, the Salford City Council, in conjunction with the owners of the canal, the Peel Group, decided to look at a project to restore access to Worsley Delph and to allow the public into what is one of the most iconic sites of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. This was no mean undertaking because the site had become extremely overgrown and silted up. So one of the first things that was done was to allow archaeologists from the University of Salford onto the island and into the Delph area itself to record the archaeology in and around the bridge and the mine tunnels. The bridge itself is an interesting piece of industrial archaeology. It's a turnpike bridge over the line of the Worsley Brook. Worsley Brook was canalised and diverted as part of the construction of the Bridgewater Canal from 1759 onwards. And the road bridge here dates from broadly that same period. There's a number of arches on the road bridge, and local historians such as John Aldred and Judith Atkinson were well aware that these arches contained runes and holes in the ceiling which related to activity around the Delph itself. In 2013 we had an opportunity to record the eastern arches, which you can see here, and the three rooms, three interconnected rooms. Archaeologically, you can see in the bottom left hand corner there's a hole in the arch of in the roof of one of the arches, which we think gave access to the bridge above and may have been related to the corn mill that sat at the eastern end of the road bridge. These rooms are certainly part of the management system of bringing boats into and out of the Delph, although precisely how they functioned is not clear. We had the opportunity to look at an extra canal arm, now long since silted up, that ran northeastwards underneath the manorial corn mills that sat at the eastern end of the bridge. And you can see here the excavations in 2013 on the site of that lost canal arm, but also the test pits uncovering the floor of the three rooms lying underneath the road bridge. In 2018 and 2019, when the main works on the restoration of Worsley Delph were underway, our archaeology team, led by John Roberts, came back to undertake a watching brief during the restoration works. And much to our surprise, whilst the foundations for a new viewing platform were being built on the eastern side of the Delph, two new road tunnels were discovered completely unexpectedly. These were very well made tunnels. You can see here that they have lime mortar and handmade brick, very much in the style of canal, tunnel and bridge building. And we had the opportunity to laser scan them and record them in detail before the building of the viewing platform. And it's very clear that these tunnels related to and gave access to the site of the corn mill, which is where the black and white buildings are today in the top right hand corner of this slide, at this end of Worsley Delph. So there was something to do with the manorial corn mill and access to it, just as we'd looked at the canal arm and how that accessed the corn mill as well. Not only did we find two new road tunnels, but we also found two new quays for tying up boats within the Delph itself. The eastern quay was associated with an early 19th century cast iron winch that you can see in the top right hand corner of this slide. And we're fairly certain that this quay was built after 1807. The reason for that is that we have a sketch of the Delph looking southwards from that year, drawn by John Claude Nats, which doesn't show the sign of the site of the quay, which should be where I've got the arrow. So it's post 1807, probably not that long after 1807. And it may well be associated with the rebuilding and expansion of the manorial corn mill in the early 19th century. The second quay we located was on the northern side of the road bridge, and you can see that arrowed here on this slide. This too probably dates from the early 19th century because it's not visible on any of the late 18th century mapping for this area. And it's part of the way in which the boats into and out of the Delph were managed and organised. We also took the opportunity in 2018 and 2019 to record the remains of some of the canal boats that were revealed as dredging works took place in the Delf and also in the two canal arms leading into the Delf itself. At least one canal boat was known about in the Delf. It's been there since the 1970s, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. That may well have been an art installation from the 1970s, but we came across a further boat, which you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, still in situ below the site of Rock House. And that was abandoned, we know, in the mid-20th century when this part of the canal ceased to be navigable. John Roberts also took the opportunity to keep an eye on the conservation works on the island between the two canal arms leading into the entrances to the mine. We were particularly interested in recording the remains of the sluice gates for both the western and eastern mine entrance, and we were looking to see if there were any remains from the late 18th or early 19th century associated with these sluice gates. And although they'd been repaired in the 1970s, there was some material relating to the early 19th century in this area. So what we've got here is new material on one of the most important, certainly one of the most iconic industrial archaeology sites in Britain, the origin, the start of the Bridgewater Canal, the canal that is usually pointed at as being the precursor to the rest of the industrialised canal network in late 18th and early 19th century Britain. Local historians John Aldred and Judith Atkinson have come up with their interpretation on this slide here of how the boat movements and organisation of the Delf worked in the late 18th and early 19th century. And you can see that the site of the corn mill on the right hand side of both these maps had a major influence in the way in which the canal system was aligned at this point, with that canal arm running into the mill and perhaps the eastern quay providing another form of access for the corn mill. And all the time the tight area of the Delf had to be cleverly managed to allow the large volume of boat movements in and out of the coal mines. So we now have a better understanding of how these complex transport interchange worked. The second part of the project I want to talk about briefly is the community archaeology excavations at Worsley Green that we undertook in 2018 and 2019 with the help of the Salford Archaeology and History Society, South Trafford Archaeology Group, and led on the ground by Salford archaeologist Sarah Cattell. Worsley Green and Yard was the industrial heart of Worsley from the 1750s really through to when the yard mostly closed at the beginning of the 20th century. What survives today are two dry docks along the canal, which are still functioning. In fact, those two dry docks are probably the oldest working dry docks on the whole of the British canal system. But the yard was much bigger than those two dry docks. And today's Worsley Green, which you can see in the middle of this slide here, was actually at the heart of this support industrial village. It supported both the canal and the mines. The development of Worsley Green as an industrial village can be traced through estate maps from the 1780s onwards and also through Ordnance Survey maps. And there's a very interesting collection of mid-19th century maps in the Salford Local Studies Library, two of which I've put up here. On the left-hand side, we have an early to mid-19th century plan that shows some of the key warehouse and work buildings on the green, including the two dry docks and the site of a gasworks. And on the right-hand side, we have part of the completely replanned works yard from the later 19th century, showing railway access being brought in from the colliery lines to the east. There are only two known photographs of the works yard to survive before it was all closed and demolished in 1904. And you can see those two images on the left hand side of this slide. So our job was to try and locate some archaeological remains beneath the green that we could tie into these photographs and to the documentary record we have of the activity on the green. We were able to locate the manager's house, which appears to have been an 18th century cottage that was reused and expanded by the manager of the works in the 19th century. This turned out to be a large brick-built celled building, and we had pottery from the backyard of this house, which took activity in this part of Worsley back to the 17th century. We also located one of the 19th century workshops, in this case a workshop built over the site of the gasworks with railway access to the colliery lines to the east. That included not only the remains of the railway network in the form of sleepers for the railway network itself, but also spreads of metal residue from the metal processing within the workshop itself. And of course we had to have a look for the line of the mid-19th century railways that linked the site to the collieries to the east. These frequently crop up as crop marks on the green at the height of summer, and we were able to excavate a number of these to show that the crop marks represented the ghosts, if you like, of the wooden railway sleepers for the lines running into this part of the green, set within clinker ballast along the railway lines. All of that we managed to do over a 2-week period in 2019 and a week period in 2018, with members of the South Stretford Archaeological Group and the Salford Archaeology and History Society, many of whom you can see here standing in the rain at the end of the dig in August 2019. And of course, today you can go down into the Delph and as a visitor stand almost at water level and get an idea of what the entrance to the mines would have been like in the 19th century, with sculptures outlining the boats going into and out of the mines themselves, and a great big metal spinning top which is meant to represent a jib crane from the late 18th century, which would have been used to haul stone blocks away from the face of the quarry and load them into the canal boats. It gives you a real sense of theatre when you go down into the Delph today, and you do get a feeling of how small that space is and how managing the entrance and exits of boats into the mines would have been so important for the successful business of bringing coal out of WorsleyDelph and taking the coal to the markets in Salford and Manchester. If you want to learn more about the archaeology of the Bridgewater Canal, there's a number of recently published books. There's the Walking the Bridgewater second edition that we published at the beginning of 2020, an update of our 2016 volume. And also John Aldred and Judith Atkinson have produced a booklet on the development of WorsleyDelph and the industrial complex. And in 2021 there will be a Greater Manchester Past Revealed volume published on the work at WorsleyDelph and also on Worsley Green. Thank you very much.